Your bottle plant is not growing slowly because the seed is weak, and it is definitely not because you bought the wrong glass bottle. The real reason is far more dangerous because most people never even notice it happening. At first, everything looks perfect. The leaves stay green, tiny droplets of moisture cover the glass walls. The ecosystem looks fresh, alive, and healthy. That false sense of success tricks beginners into believing the setup is working perfectly. But underneath the soil, the roots may already be struggling silently. Oxygen levels slowly begin dropping. Moisture becomes trapped deep inside the lower layers. Heat starts building around the roots. And little by little, the entire ecosystem begins losing balance from the inside. The scary part is that visible damage always appears much later than the actual problem. By the time leaves finally weaken, the roots underneath may already be collapsing. This is exactly why so many bottle plants suddenly stop growing after a few days, even though everything looked completely healthy in the beginning. And once the roots become stressed, fast, healthy growth becomes almost impossible. Most beginners immediately make another mistake the moment they notice slow growth. They panic. They add more water, then stronger sunlight, then fertilizer. Then they move the bottle near a brighter window, hoping for faster recovery. But inside bottle ecosystems, sudden environmental changes create even more instability. Extra water removes oxygen from the roots. Strong sunlight overheats the glass. Excess fertilizer overwhelms delicate root systems trapped inside the environment. And instead of helping the plant recover, the ecosystem becomes weaker every single day. Bottle gardening looks simple from outside, but inside the bottle every environmental detail matters. Airflow, moisture, temperature, root health, humidity, light exposure. Everything remains connected together. One small imbalance slowly affects everything else. That is why some bottle setups collapse within days, while others survive beautifully for years. The difference is not luck. The difference is environmental stability. Successful growers understand this deeply. They focus on balance instead of aggressive correction. The biggest secret behind fast, healthy bottle growth is not watering more often. It is airflow. Most people completely ignore airflow because they cannot see it directly. But roots need oxygen just as much as leaves need sunlight. In ordinary pots, fresh air naturally moves through the soil, while excess moisture escapes gradually. But inside bottles, airflow becomes extremely limited. Wet soil remains saturated for long periods. Slowly, the oxygen surrounding the roots begins disappearing. Once that happens, healthy root activity immediately slows down. Nutrient absorption becomes weaker. New leaves stop appearing. And when the roots slow down, the entire plant slows down too. This is why many bottle plants suddenly stop growing, even though they still appear green from the outside. The roots are already struggling underneath. And because roots remain hidden below the soil, beginners rarely notice the damage until the ecosystem becomes unstable. That invisible underground stress is one of the biggest hidden killers inside bottle gardening. Another hidden problem is trapped moisture. Inside ordinary pots, extra water drains naturally through drainage holes, but inside bottles, moisture stays trapped for days or even weeks. Beginners usually check only the top layer of the soil. If the surface looks dry, they instantly add more water again. But underneath, the deeper layers may already be completely soaked. That repeated overwatering slowly destroys the ecosystem from the inside. The roots lose oxygen. Root rot begins spreading silently underground. Nutrient absorption becomes weaker every day, and eventually the plant enters survival mode instead of growth mode. That is the moment where healthy, fast growth completely stops. The truth is simple. Most bottle plants are not dying from lack of water. They are drowning from too much moisture, and because the damage happens underground, beginners usually realize the problem far too late. By the time leaves turn yellow or stems weaken, the roots underneath may already be severely damaged. Another mistake that quietly destroys bottle ecosystems is direct sunlight. Most beginners believe stronger sunlight automatically means faster plant growth. But glass changes the way heat behaves around plants. Once sunlight enters the bottle, Internal temperatures rise extremely fast. The glass traps heat like a greenhouse. The bottle may feel normal from the outside while the inside becomes dangerously hot. That hidden heat continuously stresses the roots. Moisture evaporates unevenly. Delicate leaves weaken slowly, and the ecosystem gradually becomes unstable. This is why many bottle plants suddenly stop growing even though they receive plenty of sunlight every day. The real problem is overheating, and most people never realize it. That is why experienced growers usually place bottle setups under bright indirect light instead of harsh direct sunlight. Soft filtered lighting keeps temperatures stable while still providing enough energy for healthy photosynthesis. Inside enclosed ecosystems, stability matters far more than intensity. Soil structure creates another major difference between successful and failed bottle ecosystems. Most beginners use ordinary garden soil because they think all soil works the same way. But dense soil becomes extremely dangerous inside enclosed environments. It traps excessive moisture and blocks tiny airflow pockets around the roots. Outside in nature, sunlight and wind naturally help dry the soil gradually. Inside glass, that same dense soil remains wet for extremely long periods. This creates perfect conditions for fungal growth, bacterial buildup, and root decay. That is why experienced bottle gardeners never rely on plain soil alone. They mix lightweight materials into the ecosystem: cocoa peat, perlite, sand, tiny bark pieces, activated charcoal. All of these ingredients help create airflow inside the soil while controlling moisture balance naturally. Activated charcoal becomes especially important because it absorbs impurities and slows harmful bacterial growth. Most beginners skip charcoal because they think it is optional, but surprisingly, it is often one of the hidden reasons successful terrariums survive for years. One thing many people never realize is that bottle ecosystems become more sensitive over time instead of less sensitive. Inside open environments, nature constantly refreshes the soil through airflow, microorganisms, insects, rainfall, and changing weather conditions. But inside bottles, everything remains trapped together. Moisture cycles repeat continuously. Nutrients recycle slowly. Temperature changes become amplified. That means small mistakes slowly build into larger environmental imbalances over time. A bottle setup may appear healthy for several weeks before problems finally become visible. And when visible damage finally appears, the ecosystem underneath is often already unstable. This delayed reaction confuses beginners because they cannot connect current problems to earlier mistakes. They only notice the final collapse instead of the slow environmental imbalance building underneath for days or even weeks. Plant selection changes everything. Not every plant belongs inside a bottle ecosystem. Some plants naturally prefer dry conditions with strong airflow. Others thrive in humid, stable environments. But beginners usually choose plants based only on appearance instead of environmental compatibility. That mistake slowly destroys the ecosystem from the inside. Tropical plants like moss, Fittonia, peperomia, and small ferns usually adapt beautifully because the humid bottle environment matches their natural habitat. But succulents create completely different problems. Many beginners place succulents inside bottles because they look aesthetic and modern. But most succulents naturally grow in dry climates with strong airflow and fast-draining soil. Inside humid glass environments, they slowly begin rotting from trapped moisture, even if they initially appear healthy. That delayed damage confuses beginners because the plant looked perfectly stable during the beginning stages, but underneath the soil, root decay was already spreading silently. Temperature fluctuation becomes another silent killer inside enclosed ecosystems. During daytime, sunlight slowly warms the bottle. At night, temperatures drop again. Inside small glass environments, those temperature changes become amplified. In nature, plants adjust gradually because airflow stabilizes the surroundings naturally. Inside bottles, heat and humidity remain trapped together. That repeated environmental stress slowly weakens root activity over time. Once roots become stressed, healthy growth immediately slows down. Nutrient absorption becomes weaker, New leaf production decreases, and eventually the plant enters survival mode instead of healthy development mode. This is why experienced growers avoid placing bottle setups near electronics, heaters, air conditioners, or windows receiving harsh afternoon sunlight. Environmental consistency matters far more than most beginners realize. One fascinating thing about healthy bottle ecosystems is the tiny water cycle happening inside them every single day. Water evaporates from the soil and leaves, turns into condensation on the glass, then slowly drips back into the soil again. A miniature ecosystem functioning entirely inside one enclosed container. That is why some terrariums survive for years without additional watering. But this balance is extremely delicate. Too much moisture destroys roots. Too little moisture dries the ecosystem. Too much heat weakens the plant. Too little light reduces photosynthesis. Everything inside the bottle stays connected together. One environmental imbalance slowly affects everything else. And this is why bottle gardening becomes more scientific than most people expect. Successful ecosystems survive because environmental balance stays stable over long periods of time. Another reason many bottle setups fail quickly is impatience. Most beginners interfere too much before the ecosystem has enough time to stabilize naturally. They keep moving the bottle around the room, rotating it repeatedly, opening and closing the lid constantly, adding more water too quickly, changing lighting conditions every few days. But healthy bottle ecosystems usually need time. The first few weeks are about observation instead of constant correction. Small adjustments work much better than dramatic changes. Experienced growers understand this deeply. They observe more and interfere less. They study condensation carefully. They monitor moisture levels slowly over time. They pay attention to leaf behavior, airflow, and temperature balance. That patience allows the ecosystem to regulate itself naturally, instead of constantly fighting environmental instability caused by unnecessary interference. Condensation patterns reveal far more about ecosystem health than most beginners realize. Many people assume heavy condensation automatically means the bottle environment is healthy. But that is not always true. Healthy ecosystems usually show changing condensation patterns throughout the day. Light fog may appear temporarily, then disappear naturally as temperatures shift. But if thick water droplets remain on the glass constantly, humidity may already be excessive. That trapped moisture encourages fungal growth and bacterial spread. One tiny mold patch can slowly expand across the ecosystem if ignored for too long. This is why experienced growers pay close attention to condensation behavior instead of simply focusing on leaf appearance. Condensation often reveals environmental imbalance much earlier than the plant itself. Learning how to read those moisture patterns changes everything about long-term bottle gardening success. Mold itself frightens many beginners unnecessarily. Small microbial activity naturally exists even inside healthy ecosystems. The real danger begins when environmental imbalance allows mold to spread aggressively. White fuzzy growth, unpleasant smells, rapid fungal expansion. These are signs the ecosystem is losing balance internally. At that stage, reducing moisture and improving airflow temporarily can often save the setup. Observation matters far more than panic. Many beginners destroy ecosystems by reacting emotionally instead of making calm, controlled adjustments. Successful bottle gardening depends more on patience and environmental stability than aggressive correction. Slow, careful adjustments usually work much better than dramatic environmental changes that shock the ecosystem further. Bottle size affects ecosystem stability more than most people expect. Small bottles heat up faster, lose oxygen faster, and create stronger humidity fluctuations. Larger containers usually remain more stable because environmental changes happen gradually instead of suddenly. Narrow neck bottles may look visually impressive, but they are often much harder to maintain successfully. Wider containers provide healthier airflow management and easier long-term stability for beginners. Choosing the right bottle is not only about appearance. It directly affects how balanced the ecosystem remains over time. A beautiful decorative bottle with poor airflow design may become unstable much faster than a simpler container with healthier environmental conditions. Successful growers usually prioritize environmental stability over visual appearance alone. Plant growth speed creates another hidden challenge inside bottle ecosystems. Some plants begin tiny, but eventually overcrowd the environment completely. Roots spread aggressively underneath the soil. Leaves multiply rapidly. Airflow decreases. Humidity rises even more. Eventually, the ecosystem becomes unstable because the bottle can no longer maintain proper environmental balance. This is why experienced growers often prefer naturally slow-growing species for long-term setups. Long-term balance matters far more than aggressive, fast growth. A stable ecosystem surviving quietly for years becomes much more successful than rapid growth collapsing after only a few months. Slow, healthy development always creates stronger environmental stability compared to uncontrolled expansion. And this is exactly why most beginners fail in bottle gardening. They focus only on visible growth while ignoring the hidden environmental balance underneath. But successful bottle ecosystems are not built through aggressive watering, stronger sunlight, or constant correction. They survive because airflow, moisture, heat, soil structure, and root health remain balanced together over long periods of time. Once people finally understand these hidden environmental principles, everything changes. They stop overwatering. They stop overheating the bottle. They choose plants more carefully. And most importantly, they begin observing the ecosystem patiently, instead of constantly interfering with it. That is the moment bottle gardening finally stops feeling frustrating and starts becoming truly rewarding. Another hidden mistake beginners make is overreacting the moment stress appears inside the ecosystem. The second leaves begin weakening slightly, they change everything at once. More sunlight, more fertilizer, more water, different room locations, different temperatures. But inside bottle ecosystems, too many sudden environmental changes create even more stress. Healthy, enclosed environments respond much better to slow, careful adjustments. Sometimes the smartest thing a grower can do is simply observe, quietly, before interfering. Patience becomes one of the most powerful skills in bottle gardening because ecosystems need time to stabilize naturally. Constant correction usually creates more instability than the original problem itself, and this is exactly why experienced growers always observe environmental patterns first, instead of reacting emotionally every time growth slows temporarily. Fertilizer misuse creates another hidden danger most beginners completely ignore. Inside enclosed ecosystems, nutrients remain trapped much longer than in ordinary pots, where excess minerals naturally wash away. Too much fertilizer overwhelms delicate roots and encourages bacterial growth. Many successful bottle ecosystems actually require very little fertilizer because nutrients recycle naturally over time inside the enclosed environment. But beginners often assume faster growth automatically means healthier plants. That misunderstanding becomes dangerous very quickly. Forced rapid growth usually destabilizes the ecosystem surprisingly fast. Healthy roots matter far more than aggressive leaf production. Stable growth always survives longer than forced growth. This is why experienced growers focus on root health and environmental stability instead of chasing rapid visible growth immediately. One thing social media rarely shows is how many failed terrariums exist behind every successful one. People upload beautiful final results, not the weeks or months of experimentation behind them. They do not show the bottles destroyed by overheating, the ecosystems weakened by excess moisture, the roots lost to fungal infection, the plants damaged by poor airflow. Because of that, beginners often compare their failures against unrealistic expectations. But even experienced growers lose ecosystems sometimes. Bottle gardening is less about perfection and more about understanding environmental balance over time. Every failed setup usually teaches important lessons about stability, airflow, moisture control, and root health. Failure becomes part of learning how enclosed ecosystems truly behave. Another important detail involves lid control. Some bottles remain fully sealed while others stay partially open. Beginners often assume fully sealed bottles always work better because moisture remains trapped inside. But complete sealing can become dangerous if humidity rises too much. In some cases, partially open ecosystems provide healthier airflow and reduce fungal problems significantly. Understanding when to open the bottle briefly and when to keep it sealed becomes part of learning environmental balance. Small airflow adjustments can completely change long-term ecosystem stability. Too much trapped humidity creates stress surprisingly quickly. Successful growers understand that balance matters far more than completely sealing every bottle tightly forever. Drainage layers create another major difference between successful and failed bottle setups. Experienced growers usually place gravel or small stones at the bottom before adding soil. This creates a separation zone where excess moisture collects safely away from the roots. Without that drainage layer, water remains trapped directly around the root system, increasing the risk of oxygen loss and root decay. Activated charcoal often sits above the drainage layer to help filter impurities and stabilize the ecosystem further. These structural details may seem small, but they dramatically improve long-term survival rates. Healthy roots depend heavily on stable moisture separation underneath the soil. Even tiny structural improvements create massive long-term environmental differences inside enclosed ecosystems. Cleaning the bottle properly before setup also matters more than most beginners realize. Many people simply rinse the bottle quickly and start planting immediately. But invisible chemical residue, soap traces, dust particles, or contaminants can affect delicate ecosystems later. Experienced hobbyists clean bottles carefully and allow them to dry completely before building the environment. Tiny chemical traces inside enclosed systems influence bacterial growth, plant health, and moisture balance far more than people expect. Small invisible contaminants slowly destabilize ecosystems over time without obvious warning signs. Clean preparation creates stronger environmental stability from the very beginning. Successful bottle ecosystems usually begin with careful preparation long before the first plant even enters the container. Humidity control becomes even more important in warmer climates. In hotter regions, bottle ecosystems naturally retain more heat and moisture. That means beginners living in warm environments often struggle with fungal problems more frequently than people living in cooler conditions. Understanding your surrounding climate matters because bottle ecosystems respond differently depending on room temperature and seasonal changes. Successful growers adapt their care based on environmental conditions instead of blindly following generic online advice. Environmental awareness becomes extremely important inside enclosed ecosystems because outside climate continuously affects internal balance. The surrounding environment always influences the ecosystem inside the glass. The placement of the bottle inside a room also changes ecosystem stability slowly over time. A bottle near a bright, sunny window behaves very differently from one placed under soft, indirect lighting. A bottle near electronics may experience repeated temperature fluctuations throughout the day. Even ceiling fans and air conditioning units influence moisture balance gradually. Experienced growers pay attention to environmental consistency instead of focusing only on the plant itself. The surrounding room becomes part of the ecosystem too. Small environmental shifts slowly affect long-term stability inside enclosed systems. Consistent environmental conditions usually create healthier long-term root development and stronger ecosystem balance overall. Decorative overcrowding creates another hidden issue. Many beginners try making their bottle setups look dense and impressive immediately. They add too many plants, excessive moss, decorative stones, and large wood pieces. Visually, the ecosystem looks beautiful at first, but overcrowding restricts airflow and increases trapped humidity. Over time, that decorative density creates instability. Simpler ecosystems often survive much longer because environmental balance becomes easier to maintain naturally. Healthy ecosystems usually prioritize stability over appearance. Visual beauty means very little if environmental conditions underneath remain unhealthy. Many of the longest surviving terrariums actually look surprisingly simple compared to heavily decorated beginner setups. The psychological side of bottle gardening also affects success more than most people realize. People naturally want fast, visible results. They want rapid growth and immediate progress. But healthy bottle ecosystems usually develop slowly. Stable environments may appear almost unchanged for long periods before visible growth becomes noticeable. Beginners sometimes mistake slow growth for failure and start interfering unnecessarily. In reality, stable, slow growth often indicates a much healthier ecosystem than aggressive, fast growth. Long-term survival matters more than short-term appearance. Patience becomes part of environmental success inside enclosed ecosystems, and once beginners understand this, they stop fighting the ecosystem and start working with it naturally. Another thing many people never realize is that plants communicate stress early if you learn to observe carefully. Slight leaf discoloration, weak stems, changing condensation patterns, tiny mold patches, unusual smells. These signs appear long before complete ecosystem collapse. Experienced growers learn to recognize those warnings early. That observation ability separates long-term successful bottle gardeners from frustrated beginners constantly rebuilding failed setups. Observation becomes one of the most valuable skills inside enclosed environments because early warning signs often appear long before severe visible damage develops. Most ecosystem failures actually begin quietly underneath the surface before visible symptoms finally appear. One fascinating thing about successful terrariums is that they usually become more stable over time instead of less stable. Once environmental balance develops properly, the ecosystem begins regulating itself naturally. Moisture cycles stabilize, root systems strengthen, microbial activity balances itself. The environment slowly becomes self-sustaining. That is the moment bottle gardening starts feeling almost magical. A tiny living world surviving quietly inside glass. Everything functioning together through natural environmental balance without constant human correction. Healthy ecosystems eventually begin supporting themselves naturally because every environmental factor slowly reaches stability together. And this is exactly why bottle gardening fascinates so many people around the world. Because when balance finally happens, it feels like creating a miniature, self-contained ecosystem. Water recycles naturally. Roots spread silently underneath the soil. Tiny plants adapt slowly over time. Everything remains connected through invisible environmental balance. Successful terrariums feel satisfying because they represent harmony instead of control. They show what happens when natural systems remain stable rather than constantly forced. Stability becomes more powerful than aggressive care. Natural environmental balance always creates healthier long-term ecosystems than constant correction ever could. And once beginners experience that balance for the first time, bottle gardening becomes addictive in the best possible way. The truth is simple. Most bottle plants do not fail because the plant itself is weak. They fail because the environment inside the bottle loses balance. Once people finally understand those hidden environmental principles, everything changes. They stop overwatering. They stop overheating the bottle. They choose plants more carefully. They focus on environmental stability instead of aggressive growth. And most importantly, they begin observing the ecosystem patiently instead of constantly interfering with it. That shift in mindset changes everything about long-term bottle gardening success. Before throwing away another failed bottle setup, look deeper first. Check the airflow. Observe the condensation patterns carefully. Think about temperature stability. Examine the soil structure closely. Consider whether the plant actually belongs inside a humid, enclosed environment. Because most bottle ecosystems do not collapse suddenly, the damage usually begins slowly underneath the soil, long before visible warning signs appear on the leaves. And once you finally understand how these miniature ecosystems truly work, bottle gardening becomes far less frustrating and far more rewarding than most people ever expect. That is the hidden secret behind bottle setups that grow faster, survive longer, and remain healthy for years instead of collapsing after only a few weeks.